When a humble mechanic noticed an elderly woman struggling outside his shop with a broken wheelchair, he didn't think twice. He stopped his work and fixed it for free. But minutes later, his furious boss stormed in, accusing him of wasting company time, and fired him on the spot. Humiliated and jobless, the mechanic went home, unaware that his small act of kindness had just set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, as he opened his front door, his jaw dropped. 7 black SUVs lined up across his driveway. Men in suits stepped out, and one of them said words that would leave him speechless. "Sir, the woman you helped wasn't just anyone." The metallic clang of tools echoed through Mason's auto repair as the morning sun peeked over the rooftops of Ridgewood, a small town where news traveled faster than light. The air smelled of engine oil and burnt rubber, the scent of hard work, sweat and forgotten dreams. Ethan Cole, a 32-year-old mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet heart, wiped the grease off his palms and leaned against the hood of an old Ford pickup. His shifts were long, the pay was small, but Ethan never complained. He wasn't the kind of man who talked much. He let his work speak for him. The only thing louder than the air compressors that morning was his boss, Gary Holt, barking orders from the office. "Ethan, that SUV in Bay 3 isn't going to fix itself," Gary shouted, his voice slicing through the garage like a blade. Ethan sighed and tightened a loose bolt, trying to drown out the noise. Gary was the kind of boss who measured a man's worth by how fast he made him money. To him, empathy was weakness, and Ethan's compassion had always been a quiet rebellion. That morning, as he stepped out to grab a part from the supply shed, something caught his eye. Across the street, a frail elderly woman struggled to push her electric wheelchair, its front wheel wobbling dangerously. The right tire was nearly off the rim, and traffic honked as she tried to cross. Ethan's instincts kicked in before logic could. He jogged over. "Ma'am, let me help you with that," he said softly, kneeling beside her wheelchair. The woman looked up, her eyes tired but kind. "Oh dear. I didn't mean to cause trouble. It just gave out on me halfway home." "No trouble at all," Ethan replied, inspecting the wheel. "Looks like the axle pin came loose. I can fix it right here." He wheeled her chair to the side of the road, grabbed his portable toolkit, and got to work. As he tightened the bolts, he noticed the woman's trembling hands and the faint bruise on her wrist, a sign of someone living alone, perhaps struggling more than she admitted. "You're very kind," she said, watching him. "Most people just drive by." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sometimes all it takes is stopping for a moment. World could use more of that." Within minutes, he had the wheel aligned and turning smoothly again. "There," he said, testing it. "Good as new. Try it out." The woman's face lit up as she moved forward. Her chair glided effortlessly. "You've got a good heart, son," she said, reaching into her bag. "Please let me pay you." Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just glad you're okay. Get home safe, all right?" Her eyes softened. "I will, dear. Thank you." She rolled away, but before turning the corner, she paused and looked back, almost as if she was studying him, memorizing his face. Ethan didn't think much of it. He wiped his hands and went back to the garage, but Gary was already standing there, arms crossed, face red with anger. "You mind telling me what that was?" he snapped. Ethan blinked. "Just helping a lady with her wheelchair." It was about to break. Gary stepped closer, his tone venomous. "On company time? You think I'm paying you to play neighborhood hero?" "She needed help," Ethan said firmly. "She's not our customer." Gary barked. "You leave that kind of charity work for your own hours." "Around here, we fix cars and not people." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It took 5 minutes, Gary. 5 minutes that cost me money." Gary slammed a wrench onto the workbench. "You think this place runs on kindness?" The other mechanics had gone silent, eyes flicking between the two men. Ethan felt the heat rise in his chest, but he stayed calm. "If doing the right thing gets me in trouble," he said quietly, "then maybe I'm in the wrong place." Gary smirked. "You said it, not me." He tore Ethan's name tag off his uniform and tossed it in the oil pan. "You're fired." The words hit like a punch. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the floor as the reality sank in. Then he nodded slowly, took off his gloves, and walked out without another word. The sun was setting by the time he reached his small, worn-down house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, peeling paint, creaky steps, and an old Chevy that barely started. But it was his. He brewed a cup of cheap instant coffee, sat on the porch, and stared into the quiet fields. He replayed the day over and over. Maybe Gary was right. Maybe kindness had no place in a world that measured worth in profits. But deep down, he couldn't regret what he'd done. That night, as the wind howled through the trees, Ethan fell asleep wondering what had become of the old woman. The next morning began strangely. The birds weren't chirping. The air was still heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Ethan woke to the sound of engines rumbling outside. Not one, not two, but several. Low, synchronized hums that made the glass in his windows vibrate. He pulled back the curtain and froze. 7 black SUVs were parked across his gravel driveway, perfectly aligned, their tinted windows gleaming under the morning sun. For a moment, Ethan thought it was a dream. Then he saw the men. They stepped out in silence. Men in dark suits, crisp ties, earpieces glinting. The kind of presence that carried authority and danger. Ethan's heart pounded. What in the world? He opened his door cautiously as one of the men approached. Tall, clean-shaven, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Ethan Cole?" The man asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied slowly. "What's going on? Did I do something wrong?" The man gave a faint smile. "Quite the opposite, sir. Our employer would like to meet you." Ethan frowned. "Employer? Who are you people?" The man glanced toward the lead SUV. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. Ethan's breath caught. It was her, the old woman from yesterday. But this time she looked different. No wheelchair, no worn sweater. She stood tall, regal, dressed in an elegant navy coat. Her posture commanded respect, and her eyes, though the same gentle gray, carried a weight he hadn't seen before. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice calm yet powerful. Ethan blinked, utterly confused. "Ma'am, yesterday you could barely—" She smiled faintly. "Appearances can be deceiving." Her men stepped aside as she approached. "I owe you an apology and—" "A debt of gratitude," Ethan stammered. "I was just fixing your wheelchair. That's all." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You didn't ask for money. You didn't ask for recognition. You helped because it was right. That's rare these days." She turned slightly, motioning to her convoy. "I don't reveal who I am often, but perhaps you've heard of Eleanor Vance." The name hit him like thunder. Eleanor Vance, the widow of billionaire industrialist Charles Vance, founder of the Vance Foundation, a global charity organization known for its quiet power and massive influence. Her family's empire touched everything from technology to finance. She was one of the most respected and feared figures in the country. Ethan's throat went dry. You're that Eleanor Vance?" She nodded softly. "I was testing something yesterday. You see, I disguise myself once a month to see how ordinary people treat those they believe have nothing to offer." Ethan blinked in disbelief. "You pretend to be a helpless old woman," she finished. "Yes, because that's when you see the truth in people." He couldn't find the words. The woman he thought he'd helped out of kindness had just turned his entire world upside down. Eleanor smiled gently. "And yesterday, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time. Integrity." Behind her, one of the men opened a sleek black briefcase, revealing a folder stamped with the Vance Foundation seal. Eleanor gestured toward it. "I'd like to make you an offer, Mr. Cole." Ethan's eyes darted between her and the SUVs. "An offer?" "Yes, but not here." She looked toward his house. "Get dressed. We have a lot to discuss." Ethan stood in stunned silence as she turned and walked back to her car. The engines roared to life one by one, a synchronized rhythm of wealth and mystery. He looked down at his grease-stained hands, then back at the black convoy waiting for him. Yesterday, he was a mechanic, broke, fired, invisible. Today, something far bigger was unfolding, and deep down he knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't just gratitude. It was a test, and he had just stepped into a world where kindness had consequences he could never have imagined. Ethan sat motionless on his porch steps, the low rumble of engines vibrating through the ground beneath him. The morning light glimmered against the sleek black SUVs that lined his driveway, a silent wall of power. He glanced down at his oil-stained jeans and faded flannel shirt, feeling wildly out of place in the face of such wealth and authority. "Get dressed," the woman had said. Eleanor Vance, widow of one of the most powerful men in the country, the same woman whose wheelchair he'd repaired the day before. He didn't know whether to be terrified or honored. Ethan exhaled sharply, went inside and threw on the cleanest clothes he could find, dark jeans, a gray shirt and a worn leather jacket. His reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror stared back with confusion and disbelief. "What the hell did you get yourself into?" he muttered. When he stepped outside again, one of the suited men, tall, stoic, with a small earpiece, opened the SUV door for him. Ethan hesitated before sliding inside. The interior smelled of polished leather and quiet power. Eleanor sat across from him, her silver hair perfectly arranged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Comfortable?" she asked calmly. I guess," Ethan said, still unsure of how to act. "Where are we going?" "To my estate," she replied. "It's about 20 minutes out of town." "Estate," he repeated softly. "That explains the motorcade." Eleanor chuckled, a sound both delicate and commanding. "Security is a necessity in my world, Mr. Cole." As the convoy pulled away, Ethan looked out the tinted window, his small house shrinking into the distance, replaced by winding roads, tall trees, and the quiet hum of engines. Silence settled between them for several minutes before he spoke. "Why me?" he asked finally. "There must be hundreds of people who'd help if they saw someone in need." Eleanor tilted her head. "Perhaps, but I've learned that goodness done under scrutiny is often performance. You didn't know who I was. You didn't record it, you didn't post it online, you didn't even wait for thanks. You just helped. That's rare." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable under the compliment. "I just did what anyone decent would have done," she smiled faintly. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Cole. Most people only help when it benefits them." The SUV turned onto a long, private driveway lined with iron gates and manicured hedges. At the end stood Vance Manor, an enormous stone mansion perched atop a hill. Its architecture was timeless, sharp angles, high windows, and the kind of silence that only money could afford. When the car stopped, Eleanor's men opened the doors. "Welcome to my home," she said. Ethan stepped out, staring up in awe. "This place looks like something out of a movie," Eleanor smirked. "Charles always liked grand things. I preferred simplicity, but I've learned to live with the excess." They walked through the gates, the sound of gravel crunching beneath their shoes. The air smelled faintly of roses and old stone. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. Marble floors, towering chandeliers, and walls lined with portraits that watched silently from centuries past. A butler appeared. "Mrs. Vance, breakfast is ready in the sunroom." "Thank you, Victor." "We'll join shortly." Ethan followed her through the halls, noticing the contrast between wealth and emptiness. The house was immaculate but cold, too perfect, too quiet. Eleanor gestured for him to sit at a long glass table overlooking the garden. "Coffee?" she asked. "Sure," Ethan said, feeling awkward as a maid poured it for him. Eleanor took a sip from her cup before placing it down delicately. "You're wondering why you're here?" He nodded. "You could say that." She leaned back slightly, studying him. "I run an organization, one that operates outside the usual charity models. We find people who act with integrity when no one's watching, and we put them in positions where they can make a difference." Ethan frowned. "Positions? You mean jobs?" "In a sense," she said, "but not the kind you're thinking of. We invest in people, help them rebuild their lives, fund their passions, connect them with opportunities that reward decency rather than greed." He blinked. "So you're saying, because I fixed your wheelchair, you're offering me a new life?" Eleanor's lips curved. "Something like that. But understand, I don't make these offers lightly. I test people, see who they are when the world isn't watching. Yesterday you passed that test." Ethan let the words sink in. It sounded surreal, like something out of a dream. "I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll listen," Eleanor replied. I'm offering you a choice. You can walk away right now, forget all this ever happened, or you can see where this road leads. He stared into his cup, thoughts racing. He'd been fired less than 24 hours ago. His rent was overdue. His car barely ran. And now this, a stranger with wealth beyond comprehension, offering him a path he couldn't even define. Finally, he looked up. All right, I'll listen. Eleanor smiled, a glint of approval in her eyes. Good. Then let me tell you a story. She led him into a smaller study, mahogany shelves lined with books, a faint smell of old paper and cigar smoke in the air. On the desk sat a framed photo of a younger Eleanor beside a man Ethan recognized immediately, Charles Vance, the late industrial tycoon whose death had made headlines years ago. When my husband died, she began, I discovered he'd left behind more than wealth. He'd left behind secrets, projects, experiments, and enemies. Ethan frowned. Enemies? Eleanor nodded. Charles wasn't just a businessman. He built things that could change the world. Technology, weapons, inventions that never saw daylight. After his death, many tried to seize them. The foundation became my shield, a legitimate front that protects his work. She turned to face Ethan. But lately, someone's been getting too close. Files have gone missing. People have been bribed. I needed to know if decency still existed outside my circle of power. So you pretended to be helpless, Ethan said quietly, to see who'd stop. Yes, she replied. And you did. He tried to process it all. And what does that have to do with me now? Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. It means I can trust you. And I need someone I can trust. The room felt colder suddenly. Trust me with what? A simple task, she said, her tone lowering. There's an old warehouse on the edge of town. Used to be one of my husband's storage facilities. 2 nights ago, my team detected unusual activity there. I want you to go with them, observe, and tell me what you see. Ethan's brow furrowed. Wait, you want me to go? I'm a mechanic, not a spy. That's exactly why you're perfect for it, Eleanor said. You're ordinary, invisible. No one will suspect a mechanic. He hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. And if I say no? She gave a knowing smile. Then I'll thank you for your kindness, and you'll go home with a new truck, a year's rent paid, and enough money to start over. But if you say yes, she leaned in slightly, you'll be part of something far greater than yourself. Ethan's mind raced. Logic told him to walk away, but something in Eleanor's tone, in her eyes, pulled him in. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe a need for redemption, maybe the quiet thrill of meaning after years of struggle. He exhaled slowly. All right, I'll go. Eleanor's smile widened, faint but satisfied. I knew you would. She pressed a button on her desk, and within seconds, a man entered. One of her agents wearing a black tactical vest under his jacket. This is Agent Mark Dalton, she said. He'll brief you on the way. Dalton nodded curtly. We leave at sundown. Sundown? Ethan repeated. Less eyes that way, Dalton said flatly. Eleanor approached Ethan one last time, placing a hand gently on his arm. Trust your instincts. They're what brought you here, he nodded, uncertain but resolute. As night fell over Ridgewood, Ethan found himself once again inside a black SUV, but this time, dressed in dark clothes provided by Eleanor's team. His stomach churned with nerves as the convoy sped down empty roads toward the industrial district. Dalton sat beside him, flipping through a tablet. We're not expecting trouble, he said. But if anything happens, stay behind me. Define trouble, Ethan muttered. Dalton gave a small smirk. You'll know. They reached the warehouse, an old, rusted building surrounded by silence. The team moved with precision, scanning perimeters, checking locks. Dalton motioned for Ethan to follow as they entered through a side door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating crates stamped with the faded Vance Industries logo. But something felt off. Ethan noticed fresh footprints in the dust. Recent, hurried. Someone's been here, he whispered. Dalton nodded grimly. Keep your eyes open. They moved deeper into the warehouse until they reached a back room. A steel door half open, light flickering from inside. Dalton raised his hand for silence, then pushed the door. The sight made Ethan's breath catch. Inside was a workstation, computers still running. Screens flashing data and blueprints labeled Project Helix. And scattered across the table were empty flash drives and papers with the Vance Foundation watermark. Dalton cursed under his breath. "We're too late." Ethan stepped closer, squinting at the screen. "What is this?" Dalton's jaw tightened. "Something we were never supposed to see." Suddenly a noise echoed from behind, a metallic clank. Both men turned sharply, flashlights cutting through the dark. "Did you hear that?" Ethan whispered. Dalton raised his weapon. "We're not alone." The sound came again, sharp, deliberate. A boot scraping against metal. Dalton swung his flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught a shadow darting behind a stack of crates. "Hey!" He barked, rushing forward, weapon raised. Ethan followed, his pulse hammering in his ears. The warehouse seemed to grow colder, darker, every echo bouncing off the steel walls like whispers of warning. Dalton rounded a corner, flashlight slicing through the gloom, and froze. A man stood at the far end of the aisle, half hidden in darkness. His back was turned, his hands busy over a small device glowing faintly blue. "Step away from that," Dalton ordered. The man didn't move. "Now!" Dalton shouted again, advancing carefully. Then, the man spoke, calm, detached, like he'd been expecting them. "You're too late." "Agent Dalton." The voice carried a strange familiarity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Dalton's jaw tightened. "Turn around." The figure obeyed slowly, and when his face came into view, Ethan's stomach dropped. It was Victor, Eleanor's butler. Ethan's mind reeled. "Wait, what? That's her—" "I know who he is," Dalton snapped, keeping his weapon steady. "Victor Vance, head of household for over 30 years. Victor's expression remained eerily calm. "Head of household, yes. But not by choice anymore." Ethan stepped forward. "Why are you here? What are you doing?" Victor sighed, glancing at the device in his hand. Something that should have been done years ago. He pressed a button, and the computer screens flickered violently. Files began deleting one by one, the data vanishing faster than Dalton could react. Dalton lunged forward. "No, no!" But before he could reach him, Victor pulled a small pistol from his coat, aiming it directly at the agent's chest. "Step back," he warned, his voice cold, steady. "You have no idea what you're protecting." Dalton froze, lowering his weapon just slightly to avoid triggering a shot. Ethan's heart pounded. "Victor, please, Mrs. Vance trusted you. Whatever this is, it doesn't have to go this way." Victor's eyes flickered with something, guilt, pain, maybe both. "You think she's innocent, don't you? You think Eleanor's some benevolent savior?" Ethan hesitated. She helps people." Victor let out a bitter laugh. "She used to, but not anymore. Project Helix isn't a charity, boy. It's a weapon." Dalton's voice hardened. "You're lying, am I?" Victor turned the device toward them. A holographic projection flickered to life, revealing a blueprint. A neural interface chip, small enough to fit behind the ear, surrounded by data points and diagrams labeled with chilling terms. Cognitive sync. Remote override, behavioral recalibration. Ethan's throat went dry. "What is that?" Victor met his gaze. "Mind control, Mr. Cole, packaged as medical technology. They say it's for therapy, for helping veterans, the disabled, the broken. But in reality, it's about obedience." Dalton shook his head. "That's not possible." "The Foundation is the perfect cover," Victor interrupted. "Eleanor's late husband started it as charity. But when she took over, she saw what it could become. A way to control entire populations without a single bullet fired." Ethan's world tilted. "You're saying—" "She's been lying?" Victor nodded grimly. "You were her latest test. Not of morality, of usefulness. She wanted to see if you could follow orders, if she could mold you." Dalton moved a step closer, his gun still trained on Victor. "Enough talk. You're coming with us." But before he could advance, a sharp beep echoed from the device Victor held. "She's already watching," he said quietly. A low hum filled the air. From hidden corners of the warehouse, cameras rotated, red lights blinking to life. A voice came through a speaker near the ceiling, calm, composed, unmistakable. "Victor, Eleanor's voice said, her tone steady but laced with steel. "You've disappointed me." Ethan's blood ran cold. She was listening. Dalton barked into his comm. "Control, this is Delta 1. We've got a breach. Static. No response." "Signal's jammed," Victor said softly. "Of course it is." Ethan stepped back, adrenaline surging. "What's happening?" "She's shutting it down," Victor muttered. "And you need to leave, now." Dalton grabbed Ethan's arm. "We're not leaving." But before he could finish, a blinding flash erupted from the far end of the room. A small explosion sent debris flying, throwing them all to the ground. The shockwave rattled the walls, and alarms blared as fire flickered through the darkness. Ethan coughed, his ears ringing. "Victor." He saw him struggling near the burning console, clutching the device. Dalton crawled toward him, but Victor shoved the weapon away. "Take it!" Victor shouted over the roar. "The truth? Get it out!" Dalton hesitated for a split second, then grabbed the device. Another explosion ripped through the ceiling, showering sparks. "The warehouse began to collapse. Go!" Victor yelled. "Before it's too late!" Ethan reached for him. "Come with us!" Victor shook his head. Someone has to slow her down. Before Ethan could argue, Dalton pulled him toward the exit. They sprinted through the smoke-filled corridors as beams cracked and metal screamed overhead. The night air hit them like a wave as they burst through the side door and dove behind an SUV just as the building erupted in a final fiery blast. The ground trembled. Flames clawed at the sky. Dalton and Ethan lay there, gasping, covered in ash. Ethan's voice was hoarse. "Victor, he didn't make it," Dalton nodded grimly. "He bought us time." He opened his hand, the device Victor had given him still intact, faintly glowing blue. "What's on it?" Ethan asked. "Evidence," Dalton said. "If what he said is true, this could expose everything, or get us both killed." Ethan stared at the burning warehouse, realization sinking in. "She knew we were coming." "She set us up," Dalton didn't answer. His silence said enough. The fire reflected in Ethan's eyes, anger, fear, betrayal. Just 24 hours ago, he'd been a simple mechanic, fixing broken things. Now, he was part of something so dark, so powerful, that even fixing it might cost his life. He clenched his fists. "We can't let her get away with this." Dalton looked at him, almost surprised by the conviction in his voice. "Then we run. And we don't stop until the world knows what she's hiding." Ethan nodded. "Then let's move." Dalton started the SUV, tires screeching as they tore away from the burning ruin. Behind them, flames consumed the warehouse, erasing every trace of what had just happened. But in the reflection of the rearview mirror, Ethan could swear he saw something, a silhouette at the edge of the flames. A woman in a navy coat standing still, watching as they drove away. The city was still asleep when the black SUV roared down the empty highway, its headlights cutting through the mist like twin blades. Inside, Ethan sat in silence, his hands trembling slightly against his knees. Dalton drove with a soldier's precision, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror every few seconds. Neither of them spoke for miles. The image of the burning warehouse still burned behind Ethan's eyes. Victor's last words echoing through his mind. "Get it out." He looked at the small device in Dalton's hand, still glowing faintly blue, the only piece of evidence they had left. "What's on it?" he asked finally, his voice raw. Dalton shook his head. "No idea yet. Could be encrypted. But if it's what Victor said it was, it's enough to destroy the foundation." Ethan leaned back, staring out the window. "Destroying it won't bring him back," Dalton didn't reply. There wasn't much to say. They both knew Victor had chosen his fate. The SUV sped through the night until they reached a motel on the edge of another town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Dalton checked them in under fake names, and within minutes, the two men were holed up in a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap soap. Dalton plugged the device into a laptop. Lines of code appeared instantly, encrypted data streams, locked folders, and video files labeled in strange abbreviations. Ethan hovered beside him. "Can you crack it?" Dalton's fingers flew across the keyboard. Trying, minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the clicking of keys. Then a soft beep. The screen flickered. A single video file opened. Eleanor's face filled the display. Ethan froze. "That's her." She sat in a private office, her voice calm, collected, confident. "The Helix interface," she said in the recording, "is not a weapon. It's evolution. Control without violence. Influence without chaos. Humanity needs guidance, not freedom." The camera panned to reveal a boardroom full of executives, men and women in tailored suits, nodding silently. Eleanor continued, her tone chilling in its reason.
"With Helix, we can shape behavior on a neurological level.
End addiction. End rebellion. End conflict. All we need is compliance." The video ended. Ethan stared at the dark screen. "She wasn't lying," he whispered. "It really was mind control," Dalton exhaled sharply. "Yeah, and she's selling it as a humanitarian tool." They sat there in stunned silence. Then Dalton leaned forward, unplugging the device. "We get this to someone who'll listen. Journalists, law enforcement. Anyone outside her reach," Ethan nodded slowly. "You think that'll be enough?" Dalton's jaw tightened. It has to be. By dawn, they were back on the road, driving toward the nearest city. The tension between them was heavy but steady, like two men sharing the same storm. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor, about how calm she'd looked in the video, about how, even in deceit, she had sounded right. He hated that a part of him almost understood her logic. "Dalton," he said finally, breaking the silence, "do you think she really believes she's helping people?" Dalton kept his eyes on the road. Belief and justification look a lot alike when you've got power. The answer lingered in the air like smoke. Hours later, they reached the outskirts of Dunmere City, a sprawling metropolis of glass towers and ceaseless noise. Dalton parked the SUV in an underground garage and turned to Ethan. "I know a reporter," he said. "Used to work in intelligence before she switched sides. Name's Marla Green. If anyone can get this out, it's her." "Then let's find her," Ethan said. They made their way through the city's labyrinth of streets until they reached a small cafe tucked between tall buildings. Inside, a woman in her late 40s sat at a corner table, her eyes sharp behind wire-framed glasses. When Dalton approached, she smiled faintly. "You look like hell, Mark." "Feels about right," he said, pulling out the device. "We need to talk." Marla raised an eyebrow. "That's serious?" "National level," Dalton replied. "Maybe global." He slid the device across the table. She studied it, then looked up at Ethan. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole," he said softly. "Mechanic." She smiled faintly. "You must have taken a wrong turn, then." "You could say that." Marla's tone shifted as Dalton explained what they'd uncovered. Eleanor Vance, Project Helix, the explosion, Victor's death. She listened silently, absorbing every word. Finally, she spoke. "If this is real, it'll blow the Vance Foundation apart. But you know what that means, right?" Ethan frowned. "What?" "She'll come for you both before it ever sees daylight." Dalton nodded grimly. "We're counting on it." That night, Marla set up her equipment in a rented office. Multiple screens, signal jammers, and a secure connection routed through dozens of servers. The room buzzed with the hum of technology and danger. Ethan stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "You think this'll work?" Marla looked up from her monitors. "If I can get it uploaded to 3 major outlets at once, it won't matter who tries to stop it. Once it's public, it's permanent." Dalton stood guard near the door, weapon at his side. "Then let's make it count." The minutes ticked by. Files decrypted, footage processed. On the screen, Eleanor's words replayed in endless loops, her calm tone echoing like prophecy. Then, a ping. Marla froze. "What is it?" Ethan asked. She frowned. "They've traced the signal." "Someone's in the network," Dalton swore under his breath. "How fast?" "Too fast." The lights flickered. For a split second, all the monitors went black. Then the main screen filled with a new feed. Eleanor's face appeared again. "Live." "Mr. Cole," she said softly. "You're very persistent." Ethan's breath caught. "How? You didn't think I'd let you walk away, did you?" She continued, her voice steady, her eyes calm and unshaken. "Victor always underestimated me." "So did Dalton." "But not you. You're different." Dalton stepped forward, furious. "End of the line, Eleanor. The world's about to see what you really are. Eleanor smiled faintly. And what am I, Agent Dalton? A monster? Or a visionary trying to save a world that's forgotten morality? Marla shouted. She's overriding the upload! Dalton turned. Stop it! Ethan moved instinctively, pulling the cable from the port. But it was too late. The screen flashed. The files began corrupting. One by one, the evidence vanished. Eleanor's voice echoed through the speakers. I offered you a chance to be part of something greater, Mr. Cole. Instead, you chose chaos. But I don't destroy good people. I recycle them. The screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. Marla slammed her fist against the desk. It's gone. Everything, Dalton swore again, pacing. She was inside the feed the whole time. Ethan sank into a chair, his mind spinning. Then she wins. No, Marla said firmly, her eyes fierce. Not entirely. We still have the live trace, a shadow copy uncorrupted but not erased. With time, I might recover fragments. Dalton nodded slowly. Then we buy you that time. Ethan looked up. How? Dalton's expression hardened. By drawing her attention away from here. She can't chase all of us at once. Ethan realized what he meant. You're going after her. Someone has to, Dalton said quietly. And you've already done enough. He picked up his jacket and gun, heading for the door. Ethan stood quickly. Dalton! The agent stopped, looking back. Keep your head down. If we make it out of this, the truth will too. And then he was gone. Days passed. The news reported the warehouse fire as a gas explosion. The Vance Foundation released a statement mourning the tragic loss of loyal staff. Eleanor Vance appeared on national television, calm as ever, announcing new medical grants and humanitarian projects. The world applauded. Ethan watched from a small diner, his reflection blending with hers on the screen. He hadn't heard from Dalton or Marla since that night. He assumed the worst. He paid for his coffee and stepped outside. The morning air was cold. A black SUV rolled by across the street. For a moment his chest tightened, but it didn't stop. It just kept going. He stood there, staring at its taillights until they vanished into the fog. Weeks later, a small envelope arrived at his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a flash drive, and a single line written on a folded piece of paper. Some truths can't be deleted. Ethan plugged it into his old laptop. The screen lit up. A single file appeared. It was blurry, incomplete, but unmistakable. A clip from the original video. Eleanor's voice echoed faintly through static. Humanity needs guidance. And then it cut out. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. Somewhere out there, Dalton and Marla were still fighting. Maybe they'd never win completely. But maybe, just maybe, they'd started something that couldn't be silenced. He closed the laptop, stood, and walked out into the sunlight. The world went on, unaware, unshaken. But somewhere in its quiet corners, the truth flickered like a stubborn flame. And Ethan Cole, the mechanic who once fixed an old woman's wheelchair, now carried a secret heavy enough to bend his soul. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't seek glory, he just fixed what he could. And lived with what couldn't be repaired.